Hi guys. So it's been a minute. I've been thinking a lot lately about how do I show up in this space? How do I want to be here in this space during this time? And so this is something I'm trying to be really intentional about right now. But just been giving it thought. So in the meantime, I've been sharing in my stories posts that I think should be heard and should be read and are important to think about. But something I've been reading a lot about is it's our job to show up and to share in the ways that we are equipped in our areas of, expertise. And then if we have gifts or we have stories or we have information to share that will be helpful, that is where we should take space. That is where we should share. And so I am not an expert on the Black community. I have a degree, my doctorate is in counseling psychology. Counseling psychology has a very strong emphasis. It's one of its defining characteristics on social justice. To classes, learning about the history of inequality in our country, racism, sexism, all sorts of different inequalities. I'm not going to go down that path right now, but it's all sorts of inequalities in our country. So I have some knowledge, but that's like scratching the surface. That's like foundation from which to learn from, and it doesn't make me expert. So what am I doing? I'm being curious, I'm reading, I'm learning, I'm researching. I think we all need to be independent researchers here. We can't just depend on the minorities and the Black community to educate us. We have to search it out and we have to learn. And so I'm doing that. I'm talking with my kids. I'm deep diving into different resources and doing the work there. But I'll tell you what, I'm expert in relationships. That's my space where I feel equipped to talk with you and to share with you. And so I'm gonna come today to this space with what I bring to the table to hopefully just stir up some thought, stir up some ideas, ask some questions, challenge you a bit to think about some things. And so I want to present to you a model of relationships, because if you think about it, we're having a crisis of relations right now, right? Our relationships together with one another are strained, are suffering. And so I want to come at it from that perspective. So I'm going to share with you a model of relationships and try to provide some definition to what a relationship is, what's required when you're in a relationship with someone to really have a genuine relationship, a genuine kind of depth to that and meaning to that, and provide some kind of definition so there can be a conversation about it where you're working with some constructs that are actually articulated and defined and brought to light. Because I think that things like trust, like we're in a crisis of trust right now, and but what is trust? This is like just vernacular that we throw out, but maybe there's no real definition. And so I want to bring that to the table to hopefully challenge you guys to think about some things, give you stuff to kind of process and bounce around in your own mind and just kind of reflect on. So that's where I'm going to start. My friends, let me introduce you to the relationship attachment model. This is developed by my dad. His name's Dr. John Van Epp in the 80s. He doesn't have an Instagram, so I am representing. And this is a foundation of all of our courses and what we teach. But what is so powerful about this model, okay, is this is a picture of your relationships, of all relationships, okay? And what's a relationship? A relationship is a connection. It's a connection between people. And this model unpacks 5 bonding forces, 5 connectors that exist in all of our relationships, and different amounts of these produce feelings of distance, of disconnect, of vulnerability, or of closeness and connection. Okay? So the first dynamic is know. How we know each other, how we stay in the know, how we get in each other's worlds and really understand each other, how we take time to learn about one another. You can apply this to a partnership and it might help you make more sense, but I'm even going to talk about it in terms of how we're relating to one another, how we're relating to the Black community, how we are experiencing each other. So how we stay in the know. Trust. Now, trust I'm going to talk about in a minute, so I'm going to come back to it. But trust, this is where we're really suffering right now, right? I'd say our trust is very low in one another. And trust we define as a confidence in one another, right? So you trust people and they trust you, right? Or you don't. And then it creates a lot of vulnerability in that relationship. Sometimes what we tend to do is we fill in the gaps of our belief in somebody or disbelief based on what we think we know. So I'll get into that in a minute. Reliance is dependence, how we are there for each other, how we meet each other's needs, right? You know, we're all in relationships, we constantly talk about meeting each other's needs. That's what reliance is. This is dependability, how we're dependable, and how we depend on others, right? This is a struggle also right now. We don't feel, dependable on one another, or that we can rely on each other. So commitment. Now, commitment is often talked about as almost like a defining the relationship. It's a label, but we talk about it in the work that my father and I do. We talk about it as having kind of being a bit more multifaceted, and we talk about 3 P's. So commitment is priority, presence, and a promise. All right? So we're seeing this so much right now. We're seeing people come out and speak out and make promises, but a promise is one part of commitment. If you're not present, if you're not showing up, whether that be in person or whether that be with your voice or in other ways you can show up, if you don't do that too, then it's not a full commitment. And then priority. So often we speak about priority, but we don't live out our priorities. And if you've ever been in a relationship like that, it feels empty. It feels infuriating. It feels like you speak about priority, but it's not genuinely something that's a priority to you. And so commitment is a big piece of what is going on with us right now. Is a lot of people are espousing a commitment, right? To be more open to things, to serve in different ways, to voice things differently, and to support one another and the Black community, and to show up. So it's important to examine, are you really practicing true commitment? Are you practicing that, or are you just speaking it out? Are you living it? And touch. So touch is important in our relationships. In romantic relationships, we think of it like, a hug, a kiss, holding hands, having sex, like all these different things. But touch is our physical selves. It's how we physically show up in our relationships. And so to be in relationship with people, we got to pay attention to all of these areas. How are we knowing each other? What are we learning? How are we really paying attention with our senses, right? With what we hear and what we see, and how we make sense of information, how are we taking it in and getting to know each other? And this is so important right now. We need to get to know each other and our true hearts, and take hard looks at history and information and what's going on right now in our country. How are we trusting each other, relying on each other? How are we showing up and practicing priority and presence and living out a promise? And how are we physically touching the lives of others? So I just wanted to share this to give some context some definition to what is happening, and to maybe help some self-reflection and some dialogue or some thought about these things. And then I want to quickly talk about trust. Trust, I see, is a big piece of what we are struggling with so much right now. So trust, to define it, trust is a feeling of confidence or a belief in another that comes from what we think about what we know. Okay? It's not based on fact. It's based on what we think about what we know. And so this what trust does is it forms this sort of picture. We can call it a picture, we can call it a template in our minds. You do this with a partner. If you're in a relationship, you do this with your partner, you do this with your kids, you do this with acquaintances, with teachers, with police officers, with firefighters, with mailmen, everybody. We have these templates that are in our minds that we interact with, that we fill in the gaps using these templates in our minds. And these are our trust picture. It's an internal sort of belief system that affects the way that we feel confidence in another, a positivity or a negativity. It affects our attitude. But it's not always based on fact. And when we interact with people, we're most often interacting with this picture in our head. We're interacting with these templates, and we're filling in the gaps, and we're jumping to conclusions and making assumptions. And so it's really, really important now, more than I don't know ever, but more than a long time in history, for us to revisit these templates and question them. These templates, they're formed when we're very, very young, and they develop over time, and they're influenced by a lot of things. I want to give you three databases we pull from when we form these templates in our mind. One is stereotypes. One is ideals and associations. Stereotypes are not inherently bad. Stereotypes are shortcuts for us to fill in the gaps, to kind of process information faster. But when these are clouded, they can become dangerous. When they are not checked based on factual knowledge, on real experiences, these can become dangerous. These filter into our belief system, our trust picture about people, about individuals, about groups of people, our ideals, right? What makes an ideal citizen? Excuse me. What makes an ideal citizen? What makes an ideal helper, white helping professional during this time? What makes, ideals we've formed when we're really, really young, and they keep evolving over time. And these are part of what filter into these templates and form these. And then associations. Associations are like personalized stereotypes. Maybe we had an experience with one particular person, and that influenced our whole view, and we made these generalizations. So associations are like personalized stereotypes. So these things are shortcuts. They help us fill in the gaps. They help us process information. But we have to have some awareness of these, because they are going to form our belief systems, our trust pictures, these templates in our mind that we are going to take out into the world with us and treat people according to these beliefs in our mind and our confidence in another, our attitude towards others. So this is really the piece I want you to consider. I want you to consider where you're at. What are these templates that you're operating with? And we need to be independent consumers of information. We need to put in the time, put in the effort, challenge ourselves to check ourselves against factual knowledge, real experiences, and revise these 3 areas, and ultimately revise the templates that we're interacting with others, in our relationships, so they can be more accurately based on factual knowledge and not necessarily these stereotypes and these ideals and these associations that might be completely clouded with misinformation. We got a lot of work to do. And so I'm hoping that this at least gets some things going in terms of your thoughts and your feelings about this stuff, and thinking about how are we in relationship with each other right now. How are we in relationship if you're white? How are we in relationship with the Black community? How are we affecting and touching the lives of others? How are we prioritizing things? How are we meeting the needs? Maybe we're talking about commitments and priorities, but we're not really showing up. Maybe we're saying that it's a priority, but we're not doing the work to get to know what's really going on. And so I just challenge you to think through these things. Check yourself. Where are you at? Ask yourself some hard questions. Be independent researchers. Evaluate these templates that are affecting your belief in people, your confidence in people. And hopefully our relationships will change. I hope this was helpful.